So in this segment, I'll be showing you what Hunter recommends for installing the ACC wall mount controller, as well as the ACC plastic pedestal and the metal pedestal, and what it takes to get it operational. The tools needed for the installation are a drill, a pair of wire strippers, and a long number 2 Phillips screwdriver. So there's a few things to think about when you're considering a mounting location for your wall mount or your pedestal controllers. Of course, one of the main things is your power supply. Where do you have access to a switch or a circuit breaker within that area? Another consideration might be avoiding the direct sprinkler spray where possible, and or direct sunlight if you're able to. One of the other considerations might also be the proximity to your field wire and or your sensor wires. Where's your sensor going to go? Where is the field wire coming in from? So those will be things to think about. Now when it comes to pedestal controllers, they're usually out in the open, and you might want to take into account any possible tree root growth down the road, as well as if you're in a low spot that may collect water even though your pedestal is a couple inches off the ground. That can make a big difference there. One of the last things is also communications. So if you'll be using a central system where you'll be communicating from a central computer remotely, you want to consider if you're going to be using hardwire, phone line, an Ethernet cable, and that'll also dictate where the controller ends up going very possibly. So take those things into consideration before you select your location. The maximum power draw of an ACC controller by itself is 2 amps at 120 volts, or 1 amp in the 230 volt applications. Additional devices on the power line will pull additional current, so size your power wires with these details in mind. Before mounting this particular version of the ACC, you'll want to remove the outer metal door, as well as the inner controller assembly. And to do so, we'll start by pressing the door upwards off the hinge. Then we'll open up the inner assembly, making sure to remove the inner gray ribbon from the door frame. Then from there, we'll simply press the inner door assembly upwards and pop the lower pin out of the lower hinge. So this is a location we've chosen to install our example ACC wall mount controller. It's relatively out of the elements and out of the line of fire from direct sprinkler spray. As well, I've purchased some hardware separately that would work well for this block application. You'll need to decide what type of hardware will work for where you'll be mounting your controller. So mark the desired controller location on the surface that you'll be using. Then we'll drill out the top center screw hole first. So I'm finishing up installing the top center anchor and screw. And once I've got that screw in place, I can go ahead and hang the box on the wall. Now, in hanging the box on the wall right here, we're going to have a few more locations to try to mark as far as the other mounting locations. But before we do that, we're going to want to make sure the box is good and level. And so for that, I'll hang a level right here across the top. And once I have the box all nice and level, I've got 3 more locations: top left, top right, and bottom center. Now remember, we're hanging the clock right now on that top center screw. That's going to stay in place, but we want these 3 additional holes for additional support. Use whatever tools you have available to reach through the top left and top right and score the mounting surface, as well as here in the bottom center. Once those 3 spots are marked, we can take the level off and the controller off the wall and go ahead and install anchors and screws in those 3 locations. So at this stage of the game, we have the controller mounted on the wall, we have the conduits installed, and all the wires ran up to the controller. We'll start talking about the wiring and the conduit here, and we'll start on the left-hand side. This is the 1/2 inch or 13 millimeter incoming power supply, be it 120 or 230, depending on your power source. And the next conduit over is going to be used for our grounding wire. That's the wire that goes from the grounding lug out to a grounding rod or a grounding plate. That's also 1/2 inch or 13 millimeter. The next conduit over is also a 1/2 inch or 13 millimeter, and we can utilize that for any sensors or communications needs that we might have. It's best to try to keep all communications in a separate conduit from the rest of the different wires to prevent any interference. And then to the right, we've got a couple of larger 2-inch or 50 millimeter conduits, and those will be used to bring our field valve wires into the controller. Remember, it's always necessary that you separate high voltage with low voltage in 2 separate conduits, and always have a licensed electrician do any of your high voltage connections. So when the electrician opens the junction box, he's going to find 3 wires coming out of the transformer. The blue are neutral wire, the black are hot wire for the 120 connection, and the brown wire, which is for the 230 connection. So you'll need to decide what power source you're using, either 120 or 230. If it is the 120, you'll use the blue wire, which will connect to your incoming neutral, and your black wire, which will connect to your incoming hot. That's going to leave this brown 230 wire extra, and you want to make sure that you do cap it off correctly with a wire nut and or wire tape, electrical tape, so as to protect it, because it will be hot during operation. Same holds true if you're using a 230 application. You'll use the blue wire for your neutral, and you'll use your brown wire for your incoming hot. Once again, that'll leave the black wire for 120 not used, and you will want to cap him off as well too. Now to the right, there's also an inline fuse for the incoming power supply, and that is a 2 amp 250 volt fast blow fuse, and by popping that fuse out, it will kill the power for the entire controller. Now don't forget, on the incoming power supply, you will not use the incoming ground wire from your supply. The ACC has a UL listed double insulated transformer and does not need the use of that green ground wire coming in. There's an earth ground lug to the immediate right of the transformer assembly. This connection is designed for lightning protection of the controller. The grounding lug helps to protect the controller from harmful field surges, particularly during lightning strikes. Communication wires are especially susceptible to strikes, so grounding is particularly important in highly prone lightning areas. In some countries, such as Australia, it is specifically prohibited to connect the incoming electrical safety ground to the earth ground lug. If you decide to connect the safety ground from the electrical service to the lug, do not drill a hole in the wiring compartment. This voids the electrical approvals. Instead, run the electrical ground through a T-junction below the controller and route it up through one of the smaller conduit openings to the lug. So our licensed electrician has wired it up for a 120 connection. And remember that local electrical codes dictate the correct installation practices. And this is why we have electricians make these connections. So a bare earth ground copper wire must be connected from the controller's grounding lug here on the inside through the conduit out to the field to a grounding rod or a grounding plate. Now, depending on what type of grounding implement you use, that will dictate at what distance it will be from the controller. At minimum, it's 8 feet or 2.5 meters. For more detailed grounding information, please consult asic.org. So now that we have the controller connected to electricity and it's properly grounded, we can begin to connect any other sensors or accessories you may be using. In this case, we'll be connecting a rain click and a flow sensor. Remember, before you proceed to having any other accessories connected, you want to ensure that you've got the cover over the junction box and the power to the entire unit is turned off. To connect a rain click sensor, take one of the sensor wires and connect it to one of the 4 sensor outputs. Connect the other sensor wire to the other corresponding sensor terminal. It doesn't matter which wire goes into which terminal, positive or negative. As well, to connect a flow sensor directly to the controller, strip the ends of all the wires and connect the black wire from the sensor to the black flow sensor terminal at the controller, then connect the red lead to the red flow sensor terminal right below it. So when you have a conventional or traditionally wired system like we have here, you'll find that every valve is going to have one station wire and have one common wire. Now typically your common wire is going to be white and your station wires will be red for easy identification. It also helps to number your different station wires so you know which one is which. Out in the field on your solenoid, you'll take one of your 2 solenoid wires and connect it to the common, and the other solenoid wire ends up going to the station wire. And those wires are brought back here to the controller and attached to the station modules. In this case, we have 2 station modules in place, but we have room for 5 more 6-station expansion modules. So let's talk about expanding our station count with additional modules. As you can see right now, I have a couple of 6-station modules installed for a total station count of 12, 6 per. And you'll notice I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more open bays, so we can expand this out to 42 stations. To do so, it's relatively easy. We'll start by going up top here and opening the slide bar to the unlocked position or power off position. At that point in time, we'll come back in and lift the plastic curtain and take the new module, slide it right into his bay, and up vertically until it snaps into place. The next module we'll also put into his individual bay, slide it vertically, and it locks into place. Now these modules are fully locked in place, but they are different. These are the AGM modules, and they have enhanced surge protection compared to the basic ACM 600 modules. Now that they're in place, we'll lower the curtain, and the final step will be to slide the slide bar back over. Now when I do that, I want you to watch for these red lights. They're going to come on. And what that's telling us is the controller is recognizing the fact that the modules are in place, and that's a good thing. So here comes the red lights. They'll come on briefly, then go out. So now you're ready to go ahead and connect up all your station wires for your additional station modules. But remember, you want to make sure that the power is completely turned off to the controller before making any additional wire connections. Once the modules have been installed, you are ready to connect the valve wires. Before making any connections, it is recommended to cut the power to the controller. To connect the valve wires, identify the common wire. Again, the common wire is usually white. Connect the common wire to any of the common terminals. It is recommended that you use the one in the middle, as you may have a pump start relay or a master valve, which connects to the terminals marked PMV and to its corresponding common terminals. Once the common wire is connected, you can proceed to connect each individual valve wire to the appropriate station terminals. So to install the inner door assembly onto the hinges, it has an upper and lower hinge pin. Simply place the upper pin into the upper hole and then gently force it upwards. That'll allow the lower pin to pop into place. And once both are in place, your inner door assembly is attached. So one of the last connections to be made here is the inner gray ribbon to the inner door assembly. Ensure that you've got the power completely turned off to the controller when you make this connection. The gray ribbon is responsible for bringing power and information over to the face pack. So now we can turn the power back onto the controller. To test the program, make sure the dial is in the run position. From there, we'll press and hold the program button. This will activate each station in sequential order for any length of time that you assign. Here we've chosen 2 minutes. You can also test the system using a remote control like the Roam or the Roam XL. These remotes allow you to walk around out in the field, and you can turn stations on and off, verifying their operation without having to walk back and forth with the controller. So here we have the ACC plastic pedestal and the ACC powder coat finish pedestal, and both pedestals come with the necessary hardware to complete your installation. That includes the metal template, the anchors, and the nuts and bolts. Now remember, on ACC plastic pedestal, it's a complete unit. It has the controller already built in. If you're going to go the route of powder coat or stainless steel version, that is a separate pedestal with a separate wall mount controller attached to the top of the metal pedestal. So here we've built our wood frame out of 1x4s. It's 2 feet by 2 feet square, or 61 centimeters by 61 centimeters. Remember, you'll want to maintain 2 inches above the existing grade for your form to prevent water from coming up on top of the form. We have the various conduits positioned here inside the form. We have 2 1-inch conduits, one for the incoming power supply and one for any future communications needs. The next conduit is 1 1/4 for grounding, and the final conduit in this case is 2-inch, and that will need to be sized depending on how many field wires you have going out to your valves. We'll want to make sure we have at least 3 inches of conduit above the cement base. So here we're approaching the final stage of the assembly of the pedestal. The wood frame is obviously done. We have our conduit in place, and the soil is installed and compacted down. So now we're ready to install the concrete within the form. So here we have the concrete installed within the form, and I've sloped it away from the center point out ever so slightly to make the water run off from the controller. I've went ahead and installed the J-bolts within the template here, and we've got about 2.5 inches above and 2 inches below of the bolts showing. The key here is I've put a nut and a washer on top of the template, and that is just to hold the bolts in place. It won't stay that way. That's going to help me guide these bolts in over the conduit. And we're just going to wiggle and work these in. And we're going to get the template just down level with the concrete. Try to make sure it's centered. I cross over the conduits. I've left this nut and washer out of the concrete here on top. I'm going to leave it in place for now, but ultimately that will be removed and the pedestal will be put on top of the template, and this nut and washer will be put on top of the pedestal, holding it down to the template. So now that the concrete is dried overnight, we'll go ahead and remove the form so we can continue to mount the pedestal and run the wires through the conduit. So now we'll remove the front door to prepare for installation. So the next step we'll be doing here is to install the lower 4 holes of the metal pedestal over onto the 4 anchors. But you'll notice first I've pulled all the wire through from the conduit in the field coming up and out. You'll want to do that first because it makes life a lot easier to get those wires pulled up with no pedestal in place. But now that my wires are all pulled up, we'll go ahead and put the pedestal on, and you might need the assistance of a helper to do this. Okay, bring it on down, lining the holes up, and drop it. Now we have our 4 holes over top of the 4 anchors. Secure the pedestal to the anchors with the supplied washers and nuts. So in attaching the ACC controller to the metal pedestal, I've already installed 2 male adapters with their appropriate lock nuts. I'll be installing another 1/2 inch male adapter here for the sensor wiring, as well as another male adapter underneath the AC junction box for the AC power to come into the junction box. So now that we have the controller mounted to the top of the metal pedestal, we're ready to pull our wires up through the pedestal and attach to the controller just like you would on a regular wall mount controller. So this completes the installation of the ACC metal pedestal controller. As you can see, we have our field wires, our sensor wires, and our ground wire coming in. And down below we have our AC conduit coming in, the ground, sensor wires, and the station wires. To install the plastic pedestal, you'll perform the same steps we already showed you in the metal pedestal concrete base installation. But this time build a form for a 21-inch wide by 26-inch wide concrete base. This is a 53 by 66 centimeter base. Again, set the form using 2x4s or 1x3s and make sure the base pad is 2 inches or 50 millimeters above grade. So we finished the installation of our ACC 99D plastic pedestal controller. This is installed very similar to how we installed the metal pedestal controller. As far as inside the wiring compartment goes, we have our decoder output module attaching to our 3 color-coded 2-wire paths that go out to the field. Next to that, we have the 2 sensor wires coming up. One of those sensor wires is for flow, and the other one is for a rain click type sensor. To the left of that, we have the grounding lug. Now that grounding lug is for an outbound ground wire that goes out to the field to a grounding rod or a grounding plate. And to the left of that, we have the incoming power supply. In our case, it's 120. We have chosen 120 here on the selector switch. We would choose 230 in case we had 230 coming in. To the right of that is the on-off toggle switch, which turns the power supply off to everything after the junction box going into the controller. Remember to have all of your high voltage connections made by a licensed electrician. So there you have the installation procedure for the three types of ACC controllers: the ACC wall mount, the ACC metal pedestal, and the ACC plastic pedestal. Take your time throughout and be meticulous with the sequence of events, and you'll have a great installation. Be sure to watch other ACC videos on programming, and thank you for choosing Hunter Products.